All right. My name is Rudy Kelly. I was born and raised in Prince Rupert, BC, and I live there still. I came back after I went to take a journalism program, a diploma program at Mount Royal College in Calgary, and that was during the Winter Olympics. So it was a great experience because I got to meet a lot of high caliber, big name reporters that came from all over the world, and I got to carry their camera bag for them and take notes for them sometimes. And that was a great learning experience. My band is Lackville Lambs, which is part of the larger Tsimshian Nation, and I'm from the Gitsi'is Raven tribe, and I'm one of 8 kids, 4 boys and 4 girls.
Wow, from a large family.
Yeah, very large family and pretty rapid succession too. I don't think no one was born more than 2 years apart. So
Oh my goodness.
mom was sturdy and busy.
I bet. Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, excellent. So my first question for you would be, did you always want to be an author?
Yes, maybe not necessarily an author, although that was always in the background. I always enjoyed writing. I enjoyed writing. I loved comic books as a kid. I was a big Marvel fan, and I was overjoyed to see when the technology finally caught up to the point where we could actually see comic book movies. And so I'm a huge fan, and me and my boys, we show up in limos and tuxedos whenever there's a debut, and it's like a grand grand opening. So yes, I loved comics and I loved the stories, and I read a lot too as a kid, novels and mostly just the cheesy little ones that you get, the Hardy Boys and stuff like that. But in grade 4, I actually wrote a newspaper for the class, for the school essentially, and I would draw pictures and make up superhero names for all the other kids in the class, the ones that I thought were cool. And so I'd make up little characters for them, and they'd have their adventures every week. And I got graded on that, so it was kind of an easy grade for me to get because it contributed towards my grade. And the students were always excited to see what the adventure they were going to get into the next week. And some were jealous because their characters weren't as cool as some of the closer buddies of mine had the coolest characters, of course. And when you're trying to make a character for like there's 30 kids, it starts to get pretty lean towards the end, and you're making up really terrible characters like Lettuce Boy or something like that. Not exactly an exciting superhero. But yeah, it got pretty thin towards the end there. So yeah, I've always enjoyed. Like I said, I was big in comic books, and then I just started writing my own stories as a kid when I was around 9 or 10.
Wow. Well, that's interesting. I see parallels with my art career. Just even as a kid, just drawing. I had a really great friend in Richard Keane. He and I joined band together, and he was the artist in the classroom, and he was always drawing something. And since my dad was an artist and my sister was an artist, I picked up pencils and started creating alongside him. I was trying to take ideas from him. So there's always sort of a mentorship when you're looking to do something. I'm thinking when you were in school writing these comics, who was your mentor? Who did you look up to at that point, or was it something that just came from inside of you?
Yeah, it was mostly from inside of me. There was I didn't know a lot of writers when I was growing up, especially at that age. Certainly not fiction writers. So it was mostly just the comics and starting to read a little more advanced. And I always did very good in English, and I actually did really well until I hit junior high, and then I kind of went off the rails like a lot of boys do and ran into some trouble. But no real actual writing influence until I got older. I just a lot of it came from my teachers. I had very supportive teachers who saw that I had a knack for it early. So certainly there was that. I had in grade 6, and then again in grade 7, I won the school's own poetry contest. And I recall one time going to the Legion because there was a Remembrance Day poem contest, and I went there and to receive my award. And I remember reading my poem, and it was quite touching because there were a couple of the veterans were crying, and so that made you it made me cry, and but it also made me, proud of what I'd done, even more so because then I thought, as a kid, what do I really know about war? And certainly I didn't know a whole lot, but I just wrote as from a kid's perspective of having read about it, and what it must have been like, and how ridiculous it is for people to go to war. And so it struck a chord with them. So I figured I must have some kind of I'm able to feel what other people are feeling at times. I certainly have used that a lot in a novel where I write from different perspectives, and I try to give each character. They don't actually physically actually narrate the story, but the viewpoint is from each character at different times, and I think that really helps the story. And I think that's kind of a knack I do have, is that I'm pretty empathetic with people, so I understand where people are coming from, and I can pick it up pretty quickly. I think when somebody's upset or how strongly they feel about something.
Yeah, no, it's well, reading your book, and I've got your book here, been
Okay.
going through it, all native, and there are some points in the book that are just hilarious. You can relate. I grew up in Kitimat.
Okay.
So I spent 10 years in Kitimat. So when I'm reading the book, I just remember all the sort of stories that sort of my friends and I have gone through, and getting up to mischief, like the one where your group has gone down to the outhouses by the
Yeah. Yeah.
getting into mischief.
Yeah, the slingshot scene. Yeah.
The slingshot scene, exactly. I was just laughing out loud. I was actually sitting on my couch just laughing out loud, because you paint a picture so nicely that you can actually sit in the scene and remember your childhood as you grew up. So when you're writing this book, is it drawn a lot on your life experiences, or you're growing up with your buddies?
Yeah, it is. Especially the basically when we get into the high school stage and or the late elementary stages, a lot of it is drawn on my experiences or stories I'd heard other friends of mine tell, or cousins. That early part there in Port Ed, I was too young really to remember a lot of Port Ed. I have a very vague memory of it because we moved from there when I was about 5 or 6. So,
Okay.
but my brothers, they used to go around looking for coins and stuff under the docks, and they used to tell me how they had to be very careful to avoid the bombs being dropped from the from the outhouse.
Yeah.
Now they didn't do what is in that story there, but when they told me that story, that made me think of that possibility and how funny that might be for kids to terrorize.
Yeah, no doubt.
But I to get there though, I of course talked to my brothers and sisters who have way better memories of Port Ed, as well as a good friend of mine who I've known since high school and who was born and raised in Port Ed, and I had him give me drive around and give me a tour of the place as it is now, and let me know where things were and how things were back when he was growing up, so I could get at least a pretty good picture to go along with what my brothers and sisters had told me.
Yeah. I've only been to Port Ed a couple times. I spent 10 years with my family up in Terrace when I went to the Free Deasing School. So I'm not completely familiar with the area, although I've been through it. And it's made a really great backdrop to what the boys are experiencing growing up, and sort of that dichotomy between the big town of Prince Rupert,
Yeah.
we have in Port Edward. It has a lot of really great, fascinating First Nations issues, although you don't really write about them straight out. also as backdrop to them. So there's the commentary running in the background that I can see from my own experience of when I was adopted as a child, so I didn't actually grow up in my home community or a village. I was adopted into a non-native family where my dad was superintendent of schools, my mom was a nurse, and I grew up in sort of the some kids would say the richer part of Kitimat, up on the hill, up in Whitesale. But I can definitely relate to some of my friends that were growing up in the village and what they kind of had to come to terms with from time to time, whether it was poverty or a broken family life or that kind of thing.
Well, Port Ed was interesting, right? Because they had different levels. They had of course the villages where people stayed, and it was a totally different sort of community, each of them. And I did used to go out there and see my cousins and babysit sometimes, and they were little communities on their own. And then in Port Ed itself, you had the Japanese workers and the white workers and Aboriginal workers all lived differently. They lived in different areas, so they had to. And the First Nations kid had a 7 o'clock curfew, and it was only for them. So so that was where Farley said that they would be all very, because they didn't have watches or anything, so the kids would have to kind of guess and be scared of being out a little too late past the 7 o'clock. And if they knew they were probably late, they would be creeping around and hiding around.
I was sheltered from that growing up. I didn't have a lot of contact, although I always thought there was something going on.
Yeah.
But I never actually kind of ran into that with myself. So it's interesting to see it, like as I said, sort of running in the background and what these boys are up to, and I can relate to all the things that they were doing and have done as kids. Oh, for sure. So in your writing process, I just wanted to talk about the novel itself. Where did the idea come from? Was it out of the experience of going to the All Native tournament, or was it bits and pieces? I'm not a writer, so I'm not really quite sure where you draw your inspirations from.
Well, I actually had been working on another book, which was originally going to be like autobiographical, because I'm born in a family of 4 boys, 4 girls, and a father that was abusive, and that affected everybody in a bad way, except for maybe me in a bit. So I was writing along those lines, and then I'd also thought though about writing a story about the All Native fiction, because I've seen other publications on the All Native, but they were kind of dry and just saying, who won and who the best players were and that sort of stuff. And you can get those anywhere. And there's already a book that's done that. So I thought it'd be more interesting to tell it through a narrative instead, through the eyes of a child and then a teenager. So I kind of abandoned my autobiography type thing with the story of being born, how things were with my family, and decided to use some of those experiences and some of the stories that I'd heard and meld them into this story about these 2 boys that want to play in the All Native tournament. And that was about it. That was the sort of the structure of it, and I just started rolling on that. And the most of it is, like I said, it's based on things I heard or saw, but a lot of it, the 2 boys and their friendship and wanting to play in the All Native, all of that's a fiction. And as you know, the game is a fiction, and most of the stuff that happens there. But I try to base some stuff too on real people. There's a character in that first game the kid watches. He's based on my uncle Art Helene, who was one of the best players in the tournament and a Hall of Famer and a true gentleman. So I depicted him exactly as that, because I wanted that one boy, that his hero was going to be one of these guys that wasn't a big brute and a braggart, and it was basically going to reflect exactly how that one boy turns out, that he's quite soft-spoken and humble and just a good kid. Right?
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's yeah, it's wonderful. It yeah, I can see the similarities with doing art. So being a carver, drawing on inspiration from historical facts or pieces that I've seen in museums to current stories and sort of upbringing where I've been. So that's what do you what kind of things do you learn along the way when you're writing something like that draws on your experiences like this?
Well, you mean learn along the way of writing this book?
Yeah.
Um, I think I learned a lot about just adding meat to the story. I'm pretty bare at times when I write normally, and I think a lot of that comes from my training as a journalist, where you write and let's get to the point, and let's not jerk around here, and let people understand immediately what's going on, and just keep it to that and not get overly flowery, unless you're writing a feature of course, and that's different. But most of the times you want to get in and out and let people know, who won, who scored, I mean, maybe some details of a comeback or however the game broke down, and a quote here and there. So I had to adapt and get back into, and I should say that, I've also written a lot of plays, and in those too, it's mostly dialogue you're writing. I mean, certainly you put a setting in there, but you're not describing, that, oh, they're gonna, you leave it up to the director to decide exactly how it's gonna look and how people are going to actually act it out. So again, that's pretty sparse, right? It's mostly dialogue that you're writing in a play. So this was certainly a learning experience for me, and I had to keep rereading it, and thankfully I have very good friends who are also writers who helped edit this, and would tell me that we don't know enough about Carol. We don't know enough about what she looks like, about what she likes to eat, a little bit maybe of what made Carol into the person she is. Obviously she's not a main character, so I can't get too into it. But give us some kind of a tidbit, some kind of a hint as to why she is who she is and what she looks like. So that was very helpful, obviously. I think even reading it after, I know it's a pretty lean book. I think some of the descriptions are go into it quite a bit, but I think it still could have been fleshed out more. But I'm also on the other hand getting a lot of people saying they appreciate how lean it is, and they like the simplicity of the language and how it flows. So it all depends on the reader, I guess.
Yeah.
I have one of my favorite authors is John Irving, and that guy. It's a chore to read his books, but it's worth it because he's such a beautiful writer. But boy, sometimes he goes off the rails and he digresses, and the next thing you know, you're like, what happened to that original story? Why are we over here? So he's very frustrating to read, but he is great at descriptive writings. Everyone has their strengths there. Of course, the extreme is everyone uses Hemingway, right? He just told the story. He wasn't flowery or pretty at all, but he told great stories.
Yeah. Oh, perfect. You're saying you went to journalism school in Calgary in the Winter Olympics. Was that was 1988?
Yeah.
Yeah. And have you been, like, your jobs that you've been through? You've said you've gone through a few different jobs, whatever that might be. Is it always involved writing?
I would say most of them have at some point or another needed writing. Yeah, I mean, after the Daily News, I went over to the Friendship House, and I worked there for close to 10 years. And the only reason I got that job as a program director, because I really had no experience running programs, was because a lot of that programs are dependent on government funding, and so they needed someone who could write proposals. And so all I needed to do was learn a template, and then so they needed someone that could tell a story on why it was needed. So I was good at that. You know, I'd make with some flowery language and maybe get some tears to roll down the cheek when when they read their proposal, so that they feel guilty to say no. So that's where I utilize my writing for sure in that respect. And then of course, once things like Facebook came along and you know you needed or to advertise for events, I was having been involved in the newspaper business, that helped as well. So I started to do a lot of like the PR activities as well for it. And ditto when I moved over to the city. Again, I was a rec director there, and they didn't have much of an online presence, so I helped with that. And I'm pretty good at it as an event organizer as well. I organized the big event when the Canucks came there and had a big signature session in the gym. That was pretty cool. And of course, I transitioned into a communications officer when I moved up to Gitsi'is, and that was my first gig as that at that. And you know, everyone always says reporters when they eventually they have to grow up and make real money and they become a communications officer. Because reporters, you know, unless you're a star and you know a big time reporter and a big time columnist, they are horribly underpaid and underappreciated. And it really bothers me sometimes when I hear people ragging on reporters, and they work very long hours and put a lot of themselves out there and really bad pay.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's too bad. You know, some of my favorite writers in sports is like Tony Gallagher.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Just funny, you know, when you switch to social media and you can actually start listening to some of his interviews.
Yeah.
Yeah, the stories they've gained over such time reporting on sports teams like the Canucks. It's amazing what they have to go through actually. What do you do when you get stuck and you're writing a piece or you're putting together a proposal or you'd have writer's block? What kind of things do you find yourself doing in order to get yourself going again?
Well, with the book, it's pretty easy actually because I do get blocked on a certain chapter or scene, and what I'll do is I'll just jump to another one or create another one if I know that you know this is likely going to happen down the road, or even if it's not going to get in the book, I may just make a scene where the you know, so for instance, say just using this book as an example, I'll just make a scene where the kids get into some sort of wacky adventure like they did in Port Ed there, and it may not make it in the book at the end of it all, but it'll get me writing again and thinking again, and so I'm still working instead of just stuck in the block, and then eventually, you know, I'll move my way back to the scene I kind of got bogged down and stuck in, and more often than not, something does finally come, and if not, I just keep doing other scenes or you know the classic get up and go for a walk or work out or just take a break, right?
Yeah.
But I always have a lot of little scenes on the go. Like yeah, usually have about you know 7 or 8 scenes going at one time, and I'll just kind of bounce around, and then eventually it you know sometimes they don't even make a rhyme or reason, and I just have to look at them later and say, okay, now I know the progression of where these scenes are going to go.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. It's sort of the same lines with doing art. When I get stuck on a piece or I'm carving a mask and it's not really coming out right, I'll change to a different media. So either I'll stop doing carving altogether and come back to it when I find another different way of inspiration, like I'll start painting or something, or I'll start carving something different, and the idea will actually come out of that. So it's interesting to see that, yeah, you start writing different ways. You know, just looking at your website and some of the blogs that you've been writing recently. Is
Yeah,
that another vehicle for yourself to keep on writing and keeping yourself with current events, or?
yeah, that's yeah that as a reporter I used to write columns, and so that was fun to do, and you know a lot of it was just it was opinion and sometimes serious, but a lot of times I was just goofing around, and it was more of a humor column, and I'd just be commenting on current events and just get the humor side of it. when I had when I started the Daily News, shortly after that, me and my wife split up at the time, and she left to go to Kelowna, where she still lives. But my kid was only about 6 or 7 at the time, and so I became a single dad, and that became that became my column. You know, because being a single dad and raising him, so it was like every second or third column was my observations and my experiences of raising a little boy by myself. So and people loved it. It became really popular. People were collecting it. I'd see people on the street and they talked about it all the time. And his grandmother actually collected every article and put them in a scrapbook for him for when he graduated. So that was just awesome. But it was
Oh,
great. Yeah, it was a great idea. I hadn't thought of doing that, right? So I was glad she did it, because I never collected them. I just, I never thought much of it, besides the fact that it was just, it was easy for me to write.
yeah.
So, maybe that helps me in this book too, right? Is that I really, I've had 2 boys since, and so all boys, everyone bugs me about that, but so I certainly at least understand that, and so obviously my first novel should be writing about boys growing up and the things, crazy things that go through their head and the fears and.
I can relate to that.
Yeah, boys are funny, eh? I mean, I
Yeah.
imagine girls are too, and I have friends with young girls and brothers and sisters, and I don't know what that is to go through that, but boys are just a riot, right? And they're you got to keep an eye on them, because they can kill
Yeah.
themselves at any minute.
Oh, yeah. No,
doing stupid shit, doing
yeah,
stupid things.
oh, we do silly things for sure. Swinging from treetops and
Yeah,
bumper shining on that kind of stuff in the wintertime. You're talking about some parts of your growing up has been difficult, and I can certainly relate with some of the friends as I got older and got to know them better and sort of what they grew up in. But most of the times that we were together, we were having a good time and having a good laugh, and humor has been a really big portion of that. I have a friend who had a really tough upbringing, and his outlet was humor, was to be laugh, to be goofy, to do boy things like swinging from trees on ropes, and you kind of shake your head at it, but you use a lot of humor in your book to help you get through tough times, I'm thinking.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah. You're right. Some people. I remember when Don Bernstick came to town for a show for an all-native tournament, and I don't know if you knew this, but I also have a lounge singer stand-up routine that I do.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. His name's the legendary Chad Estrada, and the story is that he's the half brother of Eric Estrada. And because someone told me that he's, when I was looking for a name, he said, "Hey, you kind of look like you could be Eric Estrada's brother." And so I turned it into a comedy act. And then when Don Bernstick came to town, he was looking for an opening act, and there I was. So yeah, it was quite an interesting gig. And I remember people saying after that, especially with Don's material, mine was pretty PC and mostly about the all-native tournament itself.
Yeah.
But Don's material gets pretty dark, and I remember people coming up to me and non-Aboriginal people saying they thought it was inappropriate. They they thought he went too far, right? And some of it was to them horrifying. And I had to explain to them, what, I was born in a family of 4 boys and 4 girls, and my dad was a big mean guy, and we fought each other, we beat each other up, he beat us up, and the only way we got through that was by joking about it. Like the threats. So the threats became jokes. Like I mean, just like almost in you see was the honeymooners, right? You wouldn't see that anymore on TV, right? I'm gonna send you to the moon, right? But I make jokes like that all the time, right? And my brothers and said, well, we'll talk about some of the the things that happened, and we'll exaggerate them to make them even funnier, even though they were terrible. People getting thrown out of windows and stuff like that. So it's yeah, I think that's how you survive, right? It's otherwise you just crumple up and go into a very dark place if you can't make a little fun out of tragedy. And you see it even in movies, right? Some of the horrible things that were made, they still manage to find something funny out of it. That life is beautiful, and that was a good movie, right? The guy is managing to make things funny, and he's putting on acts for that kid that he's hiding, but he's they're in a concentration camp. You got, and speaking of concentration camp, you got Hogan's Heroes. Like,
Oh yeah.
talk about a very daring project that must have been when somebody proposed that.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Well, the same with MASH.
Yeah.
So,
Lots of humor in that, and triage.
yeah, definitely. Yeah. What was it like after growing up in Port Edward? What was it like leaving the community to pursue school?
Yeah. You mean Rupert or?
Yeah.
Yeah. It was. Well, I was lucky. My sister was living in Calgary at the time. My older sister.
Yeah.
So I stayed with her. But as you would imagine, Calgary, compared to Prince Rupert, which is half Aboriginal, it was. There's a lot of Aboriginal people in Calgary too, but the attitude and the atmosphere is quite different.
Yeah. Oh, for
So
sure.
yeah, I actually wrote about that in one of my blogs when I was talking about people standing up and having to at some point to just say no to racism. And there was a scene there, a true story I told about being in the bar with, and I had a white buddy, and I met him and his friends, same thing. And one guy, saw we decided to change the channel because the hockey game was over and the basketball game was on, and the guy used the N-word to describe the basketball game.
Hmm.
He said N-ball. He said we don't want to watch this, right? And that just set me off. I mean, I was still in my 20s, so and I did fight a lot as I got older, and so I just grabbed him by the throat, and next thing you know, we were going at it. But I was really heartened by the response of the rest of the table because they were his friends. They weren't my friends. I didn't know most of them. But when the bartender came and told us that we had to leave, they said, actually, and they pointed to me and said, he shouldn't have to leave because and they pointed to their friend and said, he was the guy that said this. And they told him what he said. And they said, and that's why I'd set him off. And so the guy said, oh, the bartender said, okay. And he booted the other guy out and let me stay. So that was a nice moment to have that happen, because I thought probably I'm going to go and this guy's probably going to be outside and there may be some other guys along and it's not going to turn out so well for me. But there were people who stood up, so that's good, right? It's not all a cliche that everyone in Calgary was what you expected, and to tell you the truth, I didn't run into much of it. Sometimes when I was downtown, it was a little scary, and people said some stuff, but for the most part, it wasn't too bad. And obviously, living in Rupert, it was here a bit in the early days because we had curfews, just because we were Aboriginal kids. But today in Prince Rupert, with a near half and half population, half and half in the school district, and all the educational groundbreaking, really, a lot of it is quite innovative. The educational aspects of it, and teaching the language, and teaching the art, and renaming some of the schools and stuff. So Rupert's a good place to be in as far as being an Aboriginal person and being able to live in a respectful way with non-Aboriginal people.
Yeah, definitely. Oh yeah, no, there's been a big change for sure. Even I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and doing your Indian or Native history,
Yeah.
all of 5 days out of the whole year.
Yeah.
And that one day, I was living, and I look back on it now, living in Kitimat. We didn't even learn about the First Nations people that lived in the area, whether you're Haisla or Niska or Tsimshian or any of those, Gitsi'is. you never heard anything about that
No, it
culture.
was just a general.
Well, you knew more about the Eastern
Yeah,
side.
that's right. Yeah.
It was looking back on it when I was going to college in my 20s, I thought, oh, that's really strange. It's really odd. Um, and when I started going to Camosun College in 93 or 4, it was the first time that they had actually opened up an office within the college system teaching Indigenous studies. So, you look at it now and you can see language coming back into the classroom, and you can see names of, the old regime going out, and the First Nations name being recognized. It's really uplifting. And what a difference for our kids actually growing up in that environment.
Yeah.
Who's your biggest supporter?
My oldest son probably, and my partner, a close second. She's got lots on the go. She runs a transition house here, and so she's always working late and running around, but she's very supportive. She actually the one, she told me, she's, I always worry about money, even though we're not rich, but we do well. We're comfortable. And so when I left Lac Lamb, she basically said, I always wanted to write a book, so take a year off. I can carry the load. We've got money saved up. So and then and my son my oldest son, he's 29 now. He'd always pushed me to do it too. He said, "Yeah, man, like, didn't you say you want to write a book?" So it got to the point where I had no excuse, because I was looking for one, but there were the two most important people in my life basically telling me. So I said, "Oh, okay, well, I guess I'm writing that book." So it was kind of funny, I might not have done it if they hadn't really, really stabbed me several times, because it was a very daunting task, because as I said, I hadn't written anything that needed that much. Well, it was just that much writing, right? A lot of writing to write close to 300 pages.
Yeah.
And my goal, ironically, my goal was only about 220. I wanted it just to be so that it was novel length, like there's no official word or page length to it, but that is around what you call a novel, generally accepted. So I said that's what I want. I'm not writing a novella or a short story, but I want to write a novel. So and it ended up just ballooning, right? Because once I got those suggestions and tips from my writer buddies that said things needed fleshing out a little more, and this would be nice if you squeezed a quick scene in on this to explain that. Then I had it. I easily. It was like I said, it ended up being close to 300. So I was pretty happy with that.
Yeah, for sure. A different tangent. Have you ever played in the All Native?
I have not played in the All Native. I played basketball, but I was not. It wasn't my number one sport. I was one of these guys that liked to play those fringe sports, the non-varsity sports, more than. And because I made the soccer team too, but I didn't really like it either. I joined those just because my buddies were in them and they really wanted me to play.
Yeah.
And so, but I preferred playing backyard football, and I ended up playing in the flag football league in Rupert, which was quite competitive and big. So that was fun, and floor hockey, and then ball hockey later when in the summer when they took the ice out. So and softball. Softball was easy, and it's like. The other sports were really competitive, whereas in softball, some teams were competitive, but for the most part, you're just having fun and looking forward to that beer at the end of the game.
Yeah.
But I do have lots of friends who are basketball players, and I drew on not only my experience of covering the All Native, because as a reporter, I covered it extensively for 10 years. I had to write 3 pages a day for that tournament. And then I also wrote the program for it about 5 or 6 years. Went to the games a lot, and then so that I had a lot of knowledge in that respect. And then when it came down to things like that, games themselves and preparation, I turned to friends of mine who had lived and breathed basketball, and so they would tell me how the drills went when they tried out for the Rainmakers and stuff like that. So that's how I learned that stuff.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. In the 10 years I was back up in Terrace, and the 10 years I was there as a kid, I never went to the All Native tournament. Invited so many times. I remember when I first got into artwork in the early 90s with Therese. She encouraged me to do art.
You gotta find an excuse, come up there, get a table, sell your stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Norman Tate, God rest his soul. He invited me when I was first getting in the artwork in about 1995 or so. I was still trying to figure out how to draw an ovoid in a U form. I had this phone call with Norman Tate through an art dealer in town. And one of the first things he said, have you ever been up? He heard that I lived in Kitimat, and he said, have you ever gone to the All Native? And I said, no, what's that? He goes, we have to come up, and it's a spectacle. They do dancing, they do drumming, they do singing. There's a big opening ceremony. It's one of the funnest tournaments you'll ever see, and it's all Native people. They're all proud of who they are. And they come out as very competitive. But I never went to it, even when I was up there, living there for 10 years. I never.
Yeah, you got to make one. The food's great, and 50 teams, 4 divisions. They use the arena. They lay down the parquet floor in the arena, and then of course they got the big gym. And it's a. I love going to it, especially for the food, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I get to see some of the old traditional foods, which is great. The seaweed and rice and the baked halibut. And man,
sounds good. Yeah. So what are you doing now? Are you gone on to your second novel? Or you?
Yes, I've started working on that. And then it's funny. I look at it as a trilogy now.
Okay.
They just get bigger, but I think that's where it's going to end. But yeah, the second one tells the story of one of the boys that goes back and tells his story that isn't told in the first one, about his origins, essentially. And then I think I'm going to finish the third one. Will finish off his story as an adult, which will basically take place after All Native. So yeah, I started working on that, and I got one chapter. The opening chapter just popped into my head for the third one, so I decided to write that while I had it in my mind. And then, but I'm working on the second one and plowing away at that. Yeah, it's been quite an explosion. I also submitted a short story to a short story collection that the publisher was putting out for people it was during the height of COVID and people staying home. And so he thought it'd be interesting to get a collection of short stories on people so to maybe get an idea of what was going through people's minds during COVID and what kind of stories would come out of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I banged one out there, a bit of a thriller about a woman staying home in her trailer. And she's a drug addict, and she can't go out, and something happens. She's fighting for her life. Yeah, I've always wanted to write a thriller, so that was my thriller right there.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah. But besides that, yeah, continuing to work on, and I got a new job, so that's because of COVID, it's off to a crawling start. But pretty soon we're hoping that things are gonna open up a little more, and we'll be able to really get going on this job.
Oh, perfect. What kind of advice can you give to young people that are budding writers?
I would say mostly to try to plow through it and try to write every day if you can, even if it's just a little bit. Certainly set aside time is a good thing when you know that the least chance for you to be distracted, whether it be late at night or first thing in the morning or after dinner, go to your room. But try to set aside a time. Scheduling's hard. I'm terrible at it. but I work hard. I do know that it needs to get done, and the main thing too is now that we have phones, it used to be just carry around a notepad, but now you have notes in your phone. So I do that all the time. If I get ideas, especially jokes, like for my comedy act, and I don't do that act as much anymore because again COVID. But I get jokes, and sometimes I get ideas for the book, and so it's really good. You got to write those down right away because my memory is horrible, so I have to do it anyway.
Yeah.
But it's nice to write those down, and then you can revisit it, and you know, after a while of writing things down, some of them may actually connect to each other, and you'll get a story out of it. So, and I think the other tip is to write what you know. I think everybody knows that one, and that's what I did. I'm not going to write a John Grisham type book because I don't know the ins and outs of international intrigue and being a lawyer for gangsters or whatever it may be. So I know what it was like being an Aboriginal kid growing up in the late '60s and the '70s and '80s, and I thought, and the response I'm getting, a lot of people have written me and said that they really enjoyed the nostalgia in it, and that's what I think I'm going to work on for now, at least. I've got some other ideas kicking around, but I want to see this series through to the end, and who knows? Maybe it could be, as you know, Stephen King sticks to one little area in Maine where like he's got, that's where all his stories take place essentially, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a good formula because I think people, after a while, you got to kind of set yourself apart from other writers, and if people know, okay, this stuff's happening in Rupert, and people get to know Prince Rupert, and get a flavor of Prince Rupert, then it becomes familiar to them, and it's just like an old friend revisiting an old friend, and okay, oh, this is a different story going on in Rupert.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, excellent. Well, thank you so much for this conversation. I'd like to go on, but it's been fantastic. I think we're almost out of time. I think we're getting up to about an hour or so.
Okay.
It's really inspirational to sit and talk with you and see what
thanks.
influences and what you're doing next and your advice. So we appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And any last message if I had is to hope that kids have a little not be afraid to put themselves out there and write their stories, because one thing I did notice as a reporter when I would do career days at the high school, and the room that I was in was maybe one or two kids came in and just a few came in to be a reporter, and none of them were Aboriginal kids. So, and I also noticed that just in general, very few young Aboriginal writers, and there's got to be stories, and we know we have stories, and I think a lot of them are a little afraid of having being judged and people seeing their stuff, and because you're putting yourself out there, your feelings, and seeing if you have the talent. But that's one thing, is just don't be afraid to write. There's no proper way, there's no proper technique, and every story is valid. So
yeah, thank you.
all right.